What's the difference between shall versus should in contracting? Stick around and we're going to talk about that this evening. But first, good evening, Agile acquisition enthusiasts, and welcome back to the Underground Digital Tiki Bar. It's Friday night, and that means it's time for another episode of Agile Acquisitions and Alcohol. So cheers. All right. So this conversation is an old one, but it's one that came up recently for me, especially as we talk about Agile development. Typical government statements of work are littered with the word shall, and shall means, well, you shall. It is contractually binding, and that's where it gets really interesting. When you're talking about traditional waterfall contracts, the shalls were all about the actual technical deliverables. It shall process this many, it shall support this group, it shall, so on and so forth, right? But then when we talk about agile development, we start talking about taking the technical requirements out of the contract and putting in the requirements for the process. And this is where this difference between shall and should need to come into play. And the way I was explaining it to someone this week was the process should have the shalls, right? The shall should be, we shall observe the ceremonies associated with the sprint planning, sprint review, and sprint retrospectives, for example. We shall deliver burn down charts. We shall provide an opportunity for user interface, so on and so forth, right? These are things that should be contractually binding. And there should also potentially be there shall also be shalls for the government, right? The government shall provide a single product owner who's empowered to make decisions, for example, or the government shall provide. So almost like the assumptions that would normally go into a waterfall. I think it's a good opportunity, especially in alpha negotiations, to incorporate what the government's responsibilities and obligations are into shall statements of the statement of work, because it should be for both parties. Now, where do the shoulds and mays and wills, not the wills, but the shoulds and mays, for example, that's where, if there is technical discussion, that's where any of that would go, right? So it should result in, it should provide a capability. It may utilize open source, for example. That's where you can start to do that. But that's not to be confused with the problem statements or the product visions. I mean, the agile process should always be working towards some very clear deliverables. And so those can also be shalls, right? Shall provide a minimum viable product towards the solution associated with problem set A, right? Like whatever that might be. So the important thing is, we want to stay true to the fact that technical requirements move out of the documents, the contractual documents, so that those can live fluidly between the product owner and the scrum master, or the government and the contractors, leads through the sprint planning process, and not get bogged down with contractual modifications and such. But you want to make sure that the process, which is what the government's buying, right, the repeatable process for the delivery of functional product, that's the part that wants to be controlled. And you want to have a commitment to stay within a given scope, right? Because it could easily just go out of whack, and then nobody is happy at the end of it, right? So that is the other part that should be controlled. And then any suggestion of the specific technologies that will be used, or the specific deliverables, those should be the things that have flexibility. So if they're going to be in that document at all, that's where you'd want to use your shoulds and mays. So there you have it, should versus shall. I hope you found this useful. If you did, give me a thumbs up. If you're liking these videos, please remember to subscribe and share them to your friends. And I'll keep making them, and hopefully we will work together to continue pushing the innovation of federal government and acquisitions forward. And until next week, cheers.